Okay, good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Programs Committee of the Green Mountain Audubon Society, I'd like to welcome you to the Zoom presentation. This is the second of a four-part series given by Maeve Kim. We are very, very pleased to have Maeve present for us. I would like to give you two dates. February 18th, we have David Hoff doing a program on black-capped chickadees. And on February 26th from 7 to 8, we're going to be a co-sponsor with the North Branch Nature Center for Zach Coda, our friend, to do Owls of Vermont. At this time, Maeve is going to begin her presentation after my introduction. Her presentation will be about 45 to 50 minutes. At that point, she'll be open to questions. If you would type all of your questions into the chat screen, they will only go to the host, which at that point will be myself. I will relay the questions to Maeve and she will be answering them. So I first met Maeve about 13 years ago when I wanted to be a birder, but I've known her for many years before that. And I actually taught both of her children at Essex High School in French. Maeve comes to us with a rich background of experience. She is not only a teacher and a mentor, but she is an author, having published 2 novels herself and having several articles in Birdwatching magazine. Tonight's talk, as I said, is the second, and we are gearing up for Gear Talk. Take it away, Maeve.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, when we met last time, we talked about why are so many people bird watching? And there were lots and lots and lots of reasons why so many people are bird watching nowadays. All of these and even more. We also just started to talk about how to get started, and that part was easy. All you need is interest, curiosity, a little time, and 2 pieces of understanding. 1, that you already know quite a few birds, and 2, that you don't have to identify every single bird right now immediately. Well, tonight we're going to talk some more about some of the tools of bird watching, starting with binoculars and field guides, and moving on to other resources such as tools that will actually identify birds for you, amazing, tools that are apps and tools that will help you learn and recognize bird song when you hear it, and apps that will connect you to a worldwide network of citizen scientists and bird lovers. We're going to start with binoculars, sometimes called binocs, or if you happen to be in England, they're called bins. Well, binoculars are just what the word sounds like, a way to use both eyes together, as opposed to using your eyes monocularly as through a telescope. Birding binoculars come in a wide range of prices, from a few that are just over $100 to some that are over $2,000. And in the largest sense, you get what you pay for, in that something that's over $2,000 is going to be in a whole different world from binoculars that cost $100. But in the, say, $300 to $800 range, there are many different models that are just excellent. And every now and then, one that's even cheaper comes along and astonishes everybody. There's also a range of sizes and weights. And in general, standard binoculars are better for birding than compact binoculars. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. There are 2 important numbers on every single set of binoculars. The first number tells you how many times that pair multiplies what you can see with your bare eyes. Most birders choose binoculars between 7.5 and 8.5, or between 7 and 8.5 in some cases. More magnification than that is not necessarily great for birding. In fact, most people find it not good for birding, because when you get more than that, it's very difficult to focus on anything that's really close to you. And the binoculars are really hard to hold steady. And so some people actually get a feeling of almost seasickness when they're holding, say, 10 times or greater magnification binoculars. The second number on a set of binoculars tells you the diameter in millimeters of the end of your binoculars that are away from your eyes, the objective lens. In other words, The second number tells you how wide the end of your binoculars is. So a pair of 8x42s magnifies by 8, and the ends, the objective lenses, are 42 millimeters wide. And if you divide that second number by the first, you can get an idea of how much light the binoculars let in, how bright they are. I used to have a 70x30 compact pair, I think they were tiny. And the number when I divided was a little over 4. Since then, the real birding binoculars I've had have had a brightness number of 5. And it makes a huge difference. The numbers don't tell the whole story though. If you get a really inexpensive pair of optics, the lens coating can be so terrible that the binoculars turn out actually lighter than more expensive ones that have good optics. So you really have to test drive before buying. And here are some things to consider, and it's a lot. First, the binoculars should fit you. The size of your hands, the strength in your hands and arms, the size of your face, the distance between your eyes. If you can't adjust them properly to the distance between your pupils, you won't even be able to use your binoculars as binoculars. And if they're too big for your hands, you'll end up aching even after just a short time of birding. You might even have difficulty using the focus wheel without actually changing the position of your hands. And if they're uncomfortably heavy, you'll just make excuses not to carry them. In my early years as a birder, I had 2 pairs of binoculars. One was a humongous pair from my mother-in-law. I think they were Korean Army surplus from the Korean War. And they were fine for just leaving right next to the kitchen window and picking up occasionally to look at a bird, but I would not have wanted to carry them anywhere. And the other pair was just adorable. It was a tiny little, maybe 3 to 4 inch long and 2 to 3 inches wide pair of compact binoculars. They weighed almost nothing. They took almost no space. I liked carrying them in my fanny pack when I went hiking. I would like sitting on the side of Mount Mansfield and taking out my adorable little tiny binoculars and trying to see if I could recognize specific places down in Jericho or Underhill. But it was terribly frustrating to try to focus on a bird. And one reason was the very limited field of view, the really narrow field I was seeing through those binoculars. When I finally bought standard binoculars, I was awed by the wide field of view and by how much light they let in. And speaking of light, I bought my first birding binoculars online after doing tons of research. And I found out that Swift ultralights got consistently excellent reviews. And that name led me to believe, hey, maybe they're not going to be too much heavier than my little tiny pair. Wrong. Turns out that the ultralights were named that because of all the light they gathered, not because of their weight. As a matter of fact, they were so incredibly large and heavy that a friend said, "You have the great black-backed gull of binoculars." And here's a contrast: the great black-backed gull, the biggest gull of the world, and the kind of gull we see more frequently, the owl's French fry kind of gull. So you can get an idea of how big my binoculars were compared to most other people's binoculars. But I loved them. I liked them so much that I actually bought a second pair a few years later when the company came out with a new lens coating that let in even more light and made the binoculars work even better in low light conditions. Now about focusing. Focusing allows you to see the bird you want to see and have a sharp image of what you're seeing. If you spend a few hours birding, you'll probably turn that focusing wheel hundreds of times, and the wheel should move easily. So you can go immediately from watching a cute little tree sparrow in a tree right in front of you to checking out an osprey flying on overhead. Actually, I realized after I did that that's a pretty bad image because we almost never have tree sparrows and osprey here at the same time. But I didn't realize that when I was putting this together, or I didn't think of it rather. The focusing wheel also shouldn't turn too easily because it'll just slide. And focusing should feel nice and smooth. Low quality binoculars sometimes feel as if there's grit in the mechanism. And most people want a pair of binoculars that will focus really close, even closer than most birds will let us go, so we can get a good look at a beautiful dragonfly or butterfly. Another thing to consider is eyeglass compatibility. All good binoculars have eye cups that can be adjusted for use with or without eyeglasses. Some eye cups twist, some are push or pull, some have to be folded down, and many birders have really strong opinions as to which kind works best. If you don't have binoculars yet or wear eyeglasses, you might want to talk to some other birders and see what they prefer and why. Now, many binoculars nowadays can survive several hard bumps without losing much or any of their optical quality. But really bad things can happen to good optics. These are just some of the horror stories that I've heard. And I've also heard some wonderful stories about people getting their damaged binoculars fixed or even replaced for free or almost free because of really great warranties. Most good but optics makers now have really excellent warranties, and it makes spending that initial couple of $100 or few $100s a little less scary. And just do some research if you're in the market and find out what people say about the warranties. Even the best optics, by the way, might require occasional maintenance, not very often, but a good pair will last for years, maybe even decades. But every now and then they might need to be cleaned professionally, and they might need some other little readjustments made. Water resistance is another thing to consider in buying binoculars. Most modern pairs handle water really well. You don't have to panic if you're out birding and it starts to sprinkle. I've birded in all sorts of weather. I've birded in snow and blowing sand and rain and on boats where the spray keeps coming back into my face and into my binoculars. And I've had only one instance of water damage. A group of us went birding on Plum Island off Newburyport, Massachusetts, and it rained the entire 3 days we were there. It didn't just rain, it poured. There were times when the rain was coming at us horizontally. It was great weather for ducks. My old Swift ultralights, which were clearly labeled waterproof, ended up full of condensation. And when I got home, I put them in a sunny windowsill for 3 days, just hoping that they'd dry out. They might even have been closer to a week, but they didn't dry out. So I ended up sending them to Land, Sea, and Sky, which is a Houston company that has contracts with many different optics makers, and they were wonderful. They took my binoculars apart, cleaned them, dried them, sent them back to me within a week, and charged me only for postage. That's the advantage of a warranty. So it's tricky to make specific recommendations because new models are coming out all the time and old models are being retired. And also a pair that I might love, somebody else might find doesn't work for them at all. There is one brand, however, that's popular with many Vermont birders. It's the Nikon Monarchs. They're on the left, and they actually usually sell for under $300. And Nikon itself makes several models that they call entry-level models in the $120 range, and they all have the same excellent Nikon warranty. Well, I absolutely love my current pair on the right, Vortex Vipers. The website says premium level quality without the premium level price tag, and I agree. My Vortex Vipers are lightweight, quick to focus, easy to hold, provide bright, clear images of far away and close objects. Before you buy, Google birding binocular reviews, birding binoculars, not just any kind of binoculars, and you'll find several helpful sites. Some kinds of binoculars you can find, the reason I keep stressing it's got to be birding binoculars, are just great for like going to an opera or a Broadway show or taking with you to a football game. Other binoculars are designed specifically for hunters so they can see deer at a great distance. Still others are made for people that are on ocean-going boats. They want to see something miles and miles and miles away. None of those work well for birding. It's got to be birding binoculars. And once you have binoculars, there are some things that you can do to get the most out of them. Whoops, I skipped. This is a good place. These are all good places to look at for birding binoculars. Audubon's got a great one right online. Birdwatching Magazine does a review every single year. Cornell Ornithology Lab does a review. I don't know if that's every year. It might be. And Optics Magazine gives reviews. Now, once you've got your binoculars, here are some things you can do to get the most out of them. And the last tip is one of the most important and one of the most often overlooked. And I have to admit, with some embarrassment, that I had no idea how dirty my Vortex Vipers were until I looked closely at some of the photos that Bernie took for this presentation. I have taken the time to clean them very well since then. So you should use special lens cleaning cloth after every few outings, and more often if you've been in salt spray or sand or tree pollen, which can be really quite damaging, or snow. And when you stop for lunch during a long birding day, either take your binoculars off or use lens covers. It is astonishing how much less light your binoculars will let in if they're dusted with cookie crumbs or coated with tuna fish salad or peanut butter. Now, about the first thing on this list, calibrating. I didn't know anything about that until I'd owned binoculars and been birding for over 25 years. Calibration is not the same thing as focusing. We focus every single time we look from one bird to the next, every single time a bird moves closer or farther. Calibration only has to happen once. It will need to be redone only if different people with different eye strengths are using your binoculars. And to calibrate most kinds of binoculars, you'll use both eyes one at a time, and you'll use one at a time both the central focusing ring or wheel, it's on the left in this slide, and the ring on the right column, which is called the diopter adjustment. So it's quite a few steps, but if you just Google how to calibrate binoculars, you will find both text instructions and videos, and it's really easy. And once you get your binoculars calibrated, they are adjusted to your specific eyes, to any difference between your eyes and the strength of your eyes. And from now on, all you have to do is use that central focusing wheel to bring each new bird into sharp focus. One PS about binoculars, by the way, one of my sisters has never been able to use them, particularly the less expensive ones. She just can't see anything with them, and I don't know why. And I had one person taking some of my classes and walks that had that same problem. Well, my sister finally gave up, and she Googled monoculars for birding, and she bought a pair, and she just loves it. It's basically a little tiny telescope. It folds up neatly into her pocket. She said she feels sort of like a pirate when she takes it out. It has good magnification, and it costs a fraction of what the same quality optics would cost in a set of binoculars. And now she takes it with her every single day on daily walks around Boulder, Colorado, where she lives. And she's racking up a pretty impressive list of birds that she now recognizes. But back to binoculars. When I started birding, almost everybody wore the strap that still comes with most sets of binoculars. They just hung their binoculars around their neck. And then horror stories started emerging about people with pinched nerves in their necks or other problems. And I never liked the feeling of the binoculars bouncing up and down on my sternum anyway. So I used to sling the strap over my right arm and hang it down by my side. Well, that was pretty comfortable. But one day while hiking in Montana, I slipped on some wet leaves and I smacked. And I realized then that I would have to find a way to carry my binoculars that was more comfortable for me and safer for my optics. And I found it, as have many other birders, in a binocular harness. Harnesses take a lot of pressure off your neck. They distribute weight evenly across your shoulders and chest. And there's several brands available, some starting as low as 20. Someone may not be muted. If you're not muted, would you mute? Thank you. So now you've got your optics, you got your harness, you're out in the field, you want to see some birds. Beginning birders, even some non-bird beginners, can find it really frustrating to actually get the binoculars on what you want to see. And if you're birding with other people, it's really not fun when everybody else has their binoculars up and they're all oohing and eyeing and you're still searching. Even if a bird is sitting still, perched in an obvious place, it might be difficult to find. Here's some advice from seasoned birders. It takes practice, but there will come a day when you realize that finding what you want to look at has become easy and even automatic. Next after binoculars in importance to birders is a good field guide, either in book form or an app for your phone or your tablet. And either way, a field guide should have several essential characteristics. The last one on the list might be a bit surprising. I mean, if I find a novel, it's just as good. If I find an old copy that's been hanging around in someone's house for ages and is now in a garage sale, or if I buy a brand new reprinting at Phoenix Bookstore. But there are lots of reasons why old field guides might, well, they might not be useful, and they might actually turn out to be quite confusing. I used my old favorite, it's probably a lot of other people have too, the Golden Guide to the Birds of North America, for decades. This poor book has fallen out of my canoe. It's tumbled into a dying campfire. Many pages have gotten muddy and have been wiped clean. The whole book has been dried with a hairdryer countless times. And for sentimental reasons, I'm never going to throw this book away, probably. But I don't carry it in the field anymore. Why not? What's wrong with older field guides? Well, first, the common names of several birds have changed. My old field guide shows this sweet-faced duck, and it's called an old squaw. That bird, old squaw, cannot be found in field guides, not because they've gone extinct, but because they're now called long-tailed ducks. My old field guide doesn't mention this beautiful bird, and it's been around for ages too, a northern harrier, because they used to be called marsh hawks. And older field guides won't have listings for many birds that have been around for centuries, but had different names until recently. You know that all living things have two Latin names. It's called binomial nomenclature, or double naming. The first of the Latin names tells the genus to which the species belongs, and the second tells the species. Most living, I forgot what I was going to say here. If we see a robin on our yard, we usually use a common name, not the Latin name. We say, there's a robin. Very few of us would say, look, a Turdus migratorius. It's rare for the Latin name of a living thing to be changed. It does happen, but rarely. But common names don't change every day either, but it happens more often than a lot of us think. And it can happen for several reasons. Sometimes common names are changed to match up with the name that same species has in other parts of the world. And that was the case with old squaw, or long-tailed duck. There was one other reason in that case, however. The American Ornithologists Union, the group that decides on common names for birds, understood well that the name old squaw might be offensive to Italy naming a bird species is when DNA proves, or other scientific evidence, proves that what was thought to be one species its own name. Or when DNA shows that what was thought to be two species. Another reason for name to be changed is when DNA evidence shows that what was thought to be two species is only one. Older field guides, like my old favorite there, have a goose listed as a blue goose. Well, they're not in newer field guides because DNA evidence showed that blue geese, this handsome goose with a gray blue back and a white head, is actually just a kind of snow geese. And older field guides also don't have birds that are relatively new to North America. And that isn't so much a problem up here, but it certainly is if you're birding in Texas or New Mexico or Arizona. And they also have outdated range maps. What scientists know about the range of specific species is changing almost daily with radio tracking devices and other ways to monitor birds in flight. Humans don't know exactly what causes a species to change its range. Some possible factors are, of course, global warming or climate change, and also possibly a significant increase in backyard feeders. That last one, more and more feeders, appears to have led to a dramatic increase in titmice like this little guy and northern cardinals in our area. And species like northern mockingbirds, which do not come to backyard feeders, are also becoming common far north of their historic breeding ranges. Sometimes it's an entirely unpredictable factor that helps birds decide to move. And I mentioned this in the question and answer period in last week's program. The Eisenhower Interstate Program provided this wonderful long rolling smorgasbord of roadkill, and turkey vultures took advantage of that. And they started expanding their range northward and breeding in places where they hadn't been seen usually before the interstates were built. And there's one more reason why it might be good to buy a new field guide and retire your old one. Older books are arranged in a different order. Well, that won't matter if you're birding by yourself and you're using your old book and you really know it well. But if you're birding with a group and someone says you can find it right after hawks, and you can't find it right after hawks, then it might matter. Field guides are generally organized so the oldest species, those that have been on Earth the longest, including grebes and loons, are near the front. And species that evolved later are farther along in the book. And also species that are closer together biologically are closer together in the books. In other words, field guides are arranged taxonomically. And taxonomic order keeps changing as scientists learn more and more, mostly from DNA info. So in older field guides, right after hawks are falcons, and you could find them there because they were all raptors, birds that eat live prey, and people just figure they must be related. But in newer guides, falcons are separated from hawks by shorebirds, owls, woodpeckers, hummingbirds, gulls, terns, and a few other species. Turns out they're not closely related to hawks at all. So what are some good field guides? Well, the National Audubon Society rates the Sibley guides as the best, and many, many birders would agree. David Sibley first came out with this giant book in the middle there, and included all North American birds. And even though that book was heavy and cumbersome, it was a resounding success. People figured out all sorts of creative ways to carry it in the field. They drilled holes through it and hung it on straps. They used a table saw to cut it down slightly, just cutting the margins off. I mean, did all sorts of crazy things. I didn't do any of those, but you can see that my copy there, the one in the middle, has had some hard wear. But since then, David has divided his original tome into two, Birds of Eastern North America and Birds of Western North America, much easier to carry in the field. My second favorite is the National Geographic Field Guide to Birds of North America. It has beautiful artwork, and the app particularly is distinguished by having much more useful text, much more text and more useful text than most other apps. And both Sibley and the National Geographic Guide use drawings. Well, there are some guides that use photos. And Ken Kaufman, the Kaufman Field Guide to Birds of North America, is probably the most popular. And Kaufman came up with a very creative solution to the criticism that any photo shows only one bird, one individual. And therefore it leaves out many possibilities that may be common to that species. So what he did is take lots and lots of photos of the same species and then used a computer program to merge them. And he ended up with what has been called the platonic ideal of each bird. Sibley's books and the National Geographic guides are available as apps for your phone or tablet. And that gives you everything the book gives you, plus sound. The National Geographic guide is a free download. The Sibley guides cost about $20. Well, whether it's you rely on a book or an app, a field guide is a wonderful thing to have with you whenever you're outside. Whenever you might see a bird and you want to know what it is, or whenever someone else comes along and says, "What are you just looking at?" And it gives you a chance to share what you were just looking at with other people and share your love of birding. Here are some other tools that you might find helpful for birding. Birders tend to carry a lot of stuff, particularly if they're going to be gone a whole day. We want to be able to get at it quickly and easily. Many of us wear pants with pockets in front and back and along the legs. I have a pair like that, but the workhorse is that vest I have on right there. It has lots and lots of pockets. It holds my iPad with 2 field guides on it, so it's just like carrying 2 whole books with me for much less weight. It holds notebook and pens, sunscreen, 1 or 2 water bottles, car keys, insect repellent, and more, snacks, tissues, pepper spray if I'm out birding by myself, maybe even a lightweight windbreaker or a small flashlight. One of my daughters, by the way, titled this photo of me, "The Bird Nerd," and she hinted that she never wanted to be seen in public with me looking like this. And that was even before I added to the outfit the lovely flowered gaiters I made from old napkins before taking a trip to the southern Rio Grande Valley, because we've been really warned about ticks and chiggers. Carrying a notebook allows you to jot down bird descriptions or questions or your thoughts, a poem or something if you feel like it. And many people use a camera for similar reasons, to document what they see. Near the bottom of this list are eBird and Merlin. These are wonderful tools designed and maintained by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Green Mountain Audubon is talking about maybe doing a webinar specifically on their use, which I urge everyone to watch when it's available. But briefly, eBird is a giant database of bird sightings, and people from all over the globe report what birds they're seeing and where and when. And that information helps scientists keep track of migration patterns and population trends, etc. And once you have an account, which is free, you can submit your own sightings. You can look up well-known birding hotspots and see what birds have been seen there. You can look up where and when birds are being seen in Azerbaijan or British Columbia or Sri Lanka or Mongolia if you feel like it. One of my favorite of the features of eBird are migration maps. Every single April, I start checking in with the migration maps to see how far north ruby-throated hummingbirds have come yet, so that I can make sure that I have nectar out and ready for the first arrivals. I urge everyone to become an eBirder. Every single sighting that you record joins millions of other sightings and helps scientists learn vital information that's then used to protect important habitat here and in other countries. New birders sometimes think they shouldn't enter anything in eBird because they might make an identification error. You shouldn't worry about that. There are literally millions and millions of reports coming into eBird. Millions. 15 years after the launch of this amazing tool, there had been 100 million sightings. Only 2 years later, there had been 200 million sightings, and it's still going up. With these huge numbers, one erroneous sighting, even a few erroneous sightings, aren't going to ruin the scientific accuracy of the data. Scientists will use overall trends and profiles rather than individual reports. But in addition, every single entry is first vetted by the computer program itself. Let's say I record 13 flamingos in my backyard here in Jericho Center. My entry will be immediately flagged and I will be asked, it will be something like, this is a very unusual sighting for this location, confirm. If I confirm, I'm saying, yep, that's what it is, I know what I saw, an eBird monitor, a human being and a very good birder, will contact me. And he or she will ask, do I have photos? Do I have video? Do I have sound recordings? Was anybody else there watching with me? And if I don't have any sort of proof or backup, my crazy sighting won't even go into the main database, so we don't have to worry about it confusing things. Another product of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology is Merlin, the Merlin Bird ID, and that's a good name, Merlin, because he was a magician. And this app is an identification assistant, and it feels like magic. You enter what you're seeing or hearing. You can put in a description or a photo or a recording, and the app will give you a few educated guesses as to what bird you just encountered. Now, birders vary hugely in their ability to learn and remember and recognize bird noises. There are some people who bird almost entirely by ear. That's fairly rare. Most birders use a combination of what we're seeing and what we're hearing. And for many people, learning bird song remains a challenge. Until fairly recently, the only tools for learning bird song were first old-fashioned LPs and tapes, and then CDs with several characteristic noises for each bird. And then came collections of bird songs online, like the ones on the right side of the screen. The two best known right there are the Macaulay Lab Library of Birdsong and Xeno Canto. Of course, Xeno means stranger, like in xenophobia, and canto means song. The Macaulay Library has other things other than birdsong too. It's got coyotes, crickets, whales, dingoes, elephants, howling wolves. Xeno Canto is just birds. And I find it easier to use. You just go to that site, type in a bird, and you will find recordings of songs, chip notes, alarm notes, other noises, with a great many examples for each species. Well, those collections are great resources, and they're sort of fun to play around with, but they're not particularly great for learning bird noise. So the past several years has seen the introduction of learning teaching apps. These are pedagogically designed tools to help people practice and improve their ability to recognize and remember specific sounds, and they're on the right in the screen. The apps group birds together by sound. They include expert advice, tips, clues, tricks, mnemonic devices. They're even like computer games and quizzes to help cement new learning in the brain. And that top one, Larkwire, is the one that ranks atop of most reviews. And there's one more tool for learning birdsong and its experience. The more you can get outdoors and watch birds as they're singing while you're listening, the more likely it is that you will remember and recognize the song and be able later to match it up with the correct singer. I want to mention just one more tool for use in the field, a spotting scope with a tripod. Many birders never buy these tools, and they do just fine. Spotting scopes and tripods aren't cheap. They're heavy and awkward to carry around with you. And in addition, scopes aren't helpful at all if you're trying to get a good look at a constantly moving warbler or a kinglet or gnatcatcher. But for some kinds of birding, a scope is absolutely essential. The day that I took this, or that Bernie took this picture, we were watching hawks from about halfway up Mount Philo, and the hawks were a long distance away. And I have also discovered in the last 10 years the thrill and fascination of winter birding on the lake shore. There are literally thousands and thousands, frequently tens of thousands, of ducks that winter on our Great Lake, as well as many loons and grebes and eagles that come to join them and feast on them. And a scope allows birders to watch, identify, and enjoy them. It's cold and windy, but it's really fun. Spotting scopes are also wonderful in other seasons for carrying out to the ocean to get wonderful looks at distant seabirds, like on Plum Island, where this picture was taken. So we talked about tools that you can touch and hold. If you have any questions about binoculars, field guides, scopes, apps, or other tangible tools, enter them in chat and they'll be answered in just a few minutes. We've got several really knowledgeable members of Green Mountain Audubon Society here tonight to help out with questions. But first, I want to talk a little bit about tools that are inside us, behaviors and attitudes that can help us see more birds, see them closer, and watch them for longer periods of time. Our own behavior can be as important to birding as the bird's behavior. We birders have to realize that every single time we go out, our very presence in a bird's habitat can be disruptive to some extent. And we can all bird in a way that doesn't intrude too much. And most wonderfully, being as quiet and unobtrusive as we can benefits us as well as the birds. We'll see more birds and we'll watch them actually going about their lives. When I first started birding, that was back in the 60s, I always did what I called the 20-minute sit. I'd get to a nice field or a nice part of the woods, like this somewhat surprising set of bleachers that's at the Mud Pond Conservation Area in Williston, and I would just sit. And often at first, there'd be almost no bird noise. But within a few minutes, nature would seem to forget that I was there. Birds would go back to their everyday lives. They'd start singing again. They'd even come near me, so close that sometimes I didn't even need binoculars. One of my favorite experiences when I was a new birder was when I was sitting on a rock near a beaver pond behind our house in Essex Junction. A rock and a beaver pond that since have been swallowed up by houses, by the way. And I kept hearing what sounded like someone spitting or from a distance, little quiet noises. Took quite a few minutes, but I finally located it. A red-breasted nuthatch was backing out of a hole in the top of, near the top of a dead tree. And as he backed out, he turned and he spit out what appeared to be rotting wood. And then he dove right back in again. And he kept doing it over and over again, getting some rotting wood, coming out, spitting it onto the ground, going back in. I was a pretty new birder. I wasn't 100% sure what was going on, but I did figure out that he was probably excavating a nesting cavity. And I sat and watched for almost a half an hour. I might not have had that cherished experience if I had been striding along purposefully. I had it because I've been sitting still. Well, then I got out of the 20-minute sit habit as I got busier and I got to really want to see how many birds I could see, I guess. But a few years ago, I tried another sit. And this time I was rewarded first by little scuffling noises in the underbrush, not far from me. And then, little by little, the approach of not one, whoops, I don't know what happened to my little toy. There should be a toy, right? Oh, there's a cute little nuthatch from before, yes. Not one, but 3 eastern toys. First, scratching around on the ground for insects, and then one of them moved to a nearby flowering bush. They either never saw me there or they really didn't care. A few years ago, my partner and I offered a quiet birding class and a slow birding class for Ollie UVM. And over a dozen people signed up. And some stood or walked just a few steps here and there. A few brought folding chairs and sat quietly. And we stayed right in the parking lot of the Shalott Park and Wildlife Refuge for about 45 minutes. And then we found another place to sit. And altogether, we saw and heard about 40 species. And we really saw them. We got to spend time in their lives, watching their daily behavior. We watched this little female grosbeak, rose-breasted grosbeak, sitting on her nest. And we watched her mate singing over and over again from a nearby tree. And we just relished the complex, rich song. Both of the birds were pretty well tucked away into foliage. We might have missed them entirely if we hadn't been sitting or standing still and scanning the trees so intently for such a long period of time. After our first sit, we walked up into the fields and sat again, and this time on a handy bench, and we were visited by a curious savanna sparrow carrying a tasty caterpillar to feed its nestlings. And a little while later that same day, we also saw a pair of scarlet tanagers, and the male also had a mouthful of food to take to his young and count and marvel at least 15 bobolinks, a species that has been in serious decline for decades. The birding experience that day was rich and varied. We all ended up feeling that we had been part of the birds' lives. We hadn't just seen them and identified them, we'd shared their lives, if only for just a little while. Ethical birding requires that the birds and their habitats are always more important than the observer. Disruptions in feeding and nesting routines can be disastrous for birds. During migration, birds are likely to be exhausted. Some of them are near starvation from their long journeys. They don't have a lot of reserves left, and they need to rest and eat and not be frightened or hassled. And when a nesting bird gets scared into flight, it can leave its eggs or its young vulnerable to predators, heat, or cold. I mentioned that field guide apps have a wonderful thing, and that is that they carry sounds. And the huge increase in people who now carry birding apps on their phones or tablets has meant a corresponding huge increase in the number of times people play bird songs or calls out in the field. Playback, as it's called, can bring birds just excitingly close. It can also harass birds significantly. I was birding on Plum Island one time, and a woman with her brand new app was so excited, and she was calling a nesting marsh wren away from the nest. I watched, she called her 10 times. I finally went up to talk to her. I don't like confrontation. And when I told her that the bird was trying to make a nest, the poor woman burst into tears, which made me feel very bad. But I was also very uncomfortable watching what she was doing to the marsh wren. In some species, like American redstarts, repeated playing of a recorded song convinces nearby females that the resident male is weak and ineffectual because he can't seem to chase away that other incessant male. The poor resident male might get shut out of the breeding pool entirely for that whole season. Playing bird songs or calls is illegal in all of the over 500 national wildlife refuges in the US and also in many national parks. Here from the American Birding Association are just a few guidelines. They have many more, but I just took a few. For the kind of birding that's respectful for birds and really helps us enjoy them. And one more. When we're birding as a group, we should be aware that our behavior and the behavior of others in our group might actually have a negative effect on other birders, nearby birders who aren't part of our group, and might take away from their enjoyment of nature. We birders tend to like each other, and that's good. But it can mean we can get to chatting and laughing and swapping stories, and there goes the area's peace and serenity for other people. In summary, we humans are visitors in the birds' neighborhoods and in their homes. And if we maintain the same good manners that we use in a neighbor's living room, we can find birds and we can see birds and enjoy birds and learn about birds and experience ourselves as part of nature. Thank you so much. And we will now open this up to questions.
Thank you very much, Maeve. That was very informative. I'm sure everybody got a good tidbit and a tip. We have a couple of questions only. The first question was posed back when you were talking about binoculars. It is, do some binoculars have camera capabilities?
There are some fairly new ones. I think it's really cool. You look at a bird, it takes a picture of the bird, you've got both. I'm going to wait until they have been around for ages and get all the kinks out. I've talked to only one person who tried one of those and found it very frustrating. And I don't remember what the problems were. They're fancy binoculars. They're binoculars that have little things that adjust for if you're in a tossing boat to keep the image straight. All those things add complexity and add weight very often. So yes, you can find that. I don't know anything about it personally.
The second question, although the person who posed it said it didn't need to be put online, I think is going to be instructive. And that is, will our presentations be recorded for later review or for people missing that? And I'll answer that one. Right now, we are recording this presentation, and one of our members will later edit it, and it will be uploaded to the Green Mountain Audubon website, which is greenmountainaudubon.org, and you can click and see it under presentations. We currently have 2 other Zoom presentations that are available for you to see, and this one will be added very shortly.
Great.
Does anybody else have a question for Maeve? If so, please type it into the chat.
And while we're waiting, I just want to mention a sort of interesting thing that's going to be happening Thursday. The Friends of Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge for several years has held an evening called Bird Tales. It's always been live in the, I think, St. Albans Library. And 5 or 6 or 7 birders come, and each one tells a short story about something that's been touching or funny or exciting or some other birding adventure during the year. Well, this year it's going to be online, and it's going to be Thursday. And if you go to the Friends of Missisquoi website, you can sign up for free. It is sort of exciting. They had a limit of 60 people, and that was surpassed the first day. So they've now made a higher limit. But I think it's going to be fun.
I would like to also, as we end this fine presentation, point out to you, as I did in the beginning, that we have 2 further programs in the month of February. On February 18th at 6:30, we have David Hoff, who's going to be presenting a program on black-capped chickadees. And again, on February 26th at 7, we have Owls of Vermont, which we are co-sponsoring with the North Branch Nature Center. Maeve's next talk, which will be the 3rd in this series, is going to take place on March 11th at 6:30, and it is called Coming Soon to a Neighborhood Near You, Spring Migration. And her 4th and final part of this seminar, 4-part, will be in April 8th, and we'll be talking about that the next time. So at this point, it looks like we don't have any other questions. So I, on behalf of the Programs Committee and the Green Mountain Audubon Society, my friend Maeve and mentor, would like to thank you very much for yet another very fine presentation. And I wish one and all a good evening. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Thank you, Tom.